Joining me now is Ben Gotz to discuss this NHL Stanley Cup matchup featuring Las Vegas and Florida. Hey, thanks for taking a couple minutes.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So I know that you spent a lot of time covering the Golden Knights of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and this was billed as something a little bit more competitive as what we've seen through the first two games, a matchup that features weapons on both sides and some really talented goalies. But so far, it seems like the net minding has been one-sided. What have you made of Florida's net minding so far in this series?
Yeah, Sergei Bobrovsky obviously came into this series just red hot, and he's already allowed more goals in two games in the Stanley Cup Final than he did all of the Eastern Conference Final, which Florida swept against Carolina. I think the Knights have just made it really, really hard on him, which they've done to a lot of goalies this year. We've seen them chew up and spit out a lot of teams so far. They're the highest scoring team in the postseason, and I don't think the Panthers are helping their goalie out that much either. We've talked about Florida's getting a lot of guys kind of in front of the net. They're actually blocking their own goalie's eyes, making it harder for him to see shots. So they're not doing enough to help him out, and they're not giving him a lot of help in terms of the scoring chances they're allowing either, where the Knights are scoring off the rush. They're getting power play opportunities and getting open looks there. So it's really made life difficult for Sergei Bobrovsky, but he's probably not helping himself either. I don't think he's having his best series. And as you mentioned, at the other end of the ice, the Knights are getting outstanding goaltending from Adin Hill, considering, the Panthers have a two-time Vezina Trophy winner for best goalie in the NHL in their net. Adin Hill is in his first postseason run, but he keeps stepping up to the moment, and he's made a really huge impact on this team.
How much of it do you think is Florida's defensive struggles? And is this a steep drop-off that we've seen in terms of their ability to protect their goaltender? Are they just running into a team in Las Vegas that they are unmatched against?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both, right? I do think the Knights are just a different challenge than Florida has faced. They're so deep. The Knights can run 4 forward lines deep. All of those units can score. We've seen all of them score so far in this series, which is just remarkable. The Knights just come after you wave after wave after wave. And that's something that Florida just hasn't handled well so far. On the other hand, with the Panthers, you have to ask, are they just a little bit rusty too? Are they a little bit off their game? Because of their sweep in the Eastern Conference Final, they had 9 days off between games, between sweeping Carolina and then playing the Knights. So you wonder if they just lost that little bit of edge of mental sharpness that kept them going throughout their earlier run in the postseason. So I definitely think the Knights are a different animal, a different beast than Florida has faced before, and that's giving them a lot of problems. But I think there's a lot of areas that they can clean up as well as the series shifts back to their building.
Ben, you mentioned the performance of Adin Hill. What has he meant to Vegas in this series?
Yeah, he's been obviously so important, as any starting goalie is, but he's had a really unique path to get here, which is what I think makes his journey so incredible. I mean, this was a guy who was available for a 4th-round pick in August, really late in the offseason, from the Knights' biggest rival, the San Jose Sharks, to use goalie 3 out of 3 on the depth chart. So he comes over to the Knights. They need a guy to help fill in because their primary starting goaltender from the previous year, Robin Lehner, needed double hip surgery. So they add Hill for kind of depth purposes, and then he starts growing into his game a little bit. Under goaltending coach Sean Burke, he starts to develop a little bit more patience in his game, which helps out a lot. And it really starts to shine after the All-Star break. The Knights' main starter, Logan Thompson, who was an All-Star, gets hurt. Hill kind of takes over, gets the number 1 job, starts playing really, really well, and then gets hurt and misses the entire last month of the regular season, is not ready to go by the start of the playoffs. So it looks like it's going to be Laurent Brossoit's net. And then Adin Hill enters midway through round 2 when Brossoit gets hurt and just really has kind of never looked back. So it's been really incredible to see kind of the ups and downs of not only just his obviously career, because he's on his 3rd team so far, but even this season where he was ready for his opportunity in round 2, which is obviously not for all of a sudden he's like thrown into a game midway through the game because Knights starter gets hurt, and he's played really, really well. And I think that speaks to kind of the mental toughness he's shown during this run. I think the ultimate example is game 6 in round 2 against the Edmonton Oilers, where the Knights are looking to end that series. Adin Hill gives up 2 goals on the first 2 shots he sees, which is obviously really, really tough and can really rattle a goalie. But he immediately locks in. He makes 38 straight saves, and the Knights move on to the Western Conference Finals. So he's been really, really impressive, and I think he's playing some of the best hockey of his career right now.
So now you've got a situation where Vegas has a ton of momentum. They're heading out on the road, potentially into a hostile environment. What do you think Bruce Cassidy's message is to Las Vegas to not take their foot off the gas and to hopefully continue on the trajectory that they've been on in this final?
Yeah, I think the message is honestly just going to be play the same way we have all year. The Knights have been a really good road team. They were for the second most road points in the NHL. They have the one of the best road records. There's no real easy matchups for Florida to exploit, even though they get last change at home. So I don't expect the Knights to deviate from this script too much. I don't expect Bruce Cassidy to have to say a whole lot in Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final. I mean, this is a very, very veteran Knights team. They have 6 previous Stanley Cup winners on it. They have a lot of other guys that have been on deep playoff runs. I think they kind of know what this is about, and that's what's made them so good so far.
And how balanced is their attack? I mean, offensively, is that what makes them so dangerous, that they do have not only the veterans in the fold who, as you say, have kind of been here, done that, but they've also got a number of different ways where they can hurt you offensively?
Yeah, they've really spread the talent throughout the lineup, and that's what makes this team so difficult to deal with, right? Bruce Cassidy kind of refers it to having his 3 duos where you've got, Jack Eichel, Jonathan Marchessault, so on the top line, Mark Stone, the captain, and then Chandler Stevenson, a really fast center on the second line, and then William Karlsson and Riley Smith, who have played together since the beginning on kind of that quote-unquote third line, because they don't exactly play like a third line. So having those 3 guys, and then you add kind of a complementary piece to each of them, and Ivan Barbashev, Brett Howden, and Michael Amadio, has just made this group really difficult to match up with. It's kind of pick your poison, if you're Paul Maurice, the Florida Panthers coach, because if you put your best, defensive forward, Sasha Barkov, on Jack Eichel, for example, well, then you're leaving Mark Stone exposed, and he's scored 2 goals so far in the playoffs. Brett Howden has 3 points. William Karlsson is the Knights' second leading goal scorer in the playoffs. You have to have an answer for him as well. I mean, they have threats just coming from everywhere, and I didn't even mention the fourth line, which has really been chipping in as well. They're the reason the Knights beat Dallas in Game 6 of the Western Conference Final. I mean, it's just crazy the amount of players this team has. I mean, that can contribute. The Knights have gotten goals from 18 different players so far in this playoffs. That's tied for the most in the NHL, and there are 9 different goal scorers through 2 games of the final are an NHL record. There's just no easy way to stop this team.
Yeah, the depth is remarkable. If Florida does have a chance to get back into this series in Game 3, what can they do defensively? And even on the other side, do you see any room for improvement on the offensive end to try and generate some goals against Adin Hill? I mean, what will be the key for them to get back in?
Yeah, I mean, defensively, they've just got to clean up a lot of these kind of silly mistakes, I would say, they've been making the last couple of games. They've taken some bad penalties that were unnecessary. They talked about before. They've been screening Bobrovsky a little bit, getting in their own goaltenders' eyes, just little positioning things that they can be able to clean up and hopefully on their side limit some of the Knights' really good scoring chances. Offensively, I mean, for the Panthers, it's just going to be about winning some more loose pucks in the offensive zone. They have a really good forecheck. They're really good at hounding opposing defensemen, trying to get the puck back. And they've created some opportunities so far through 2 games. Just Adin Hill has shut the door on a lot of them. And even the ones that he hasn't, where he's created maybe a rebound, the Knights defensemen have been there to box out, clear pucks, get them, out of the defensive zone. So for the Panthers, it's kind of keep on keeping on offense. They're not, not generating anything. They are getting scoring chances. They just need to convert on more. And then when they do get a rebound off Adin Hill or create a loose puck, they got to win more of those, because right now the Knights are getting those out of the zone, and that's what's keeping Adin Hill's job a lot easier so far.
I know you mentioned that they're probably going to stay with Bobrovsky in net for Game 3. Are there any other injuries that we should be paying attention to? Any question marks in terms of availability that you've been following for Game 3?
Yeah, the biggest one for Florida is going to be Radko Gotz, who is a defenseman that left in the first period of Game 2 after getting hit by Golden Knights left wing Ivan Barbashev. I mean, Guttis has been a physical defenseman on the Panthers' third pair, which has been really successful when he's been on it so far in the playoffs, but he just couldn't continue. So we'll have to see what his availability looks like. On the other side, the Knights really haven't had a lot of injury questions this postseason. They've obviously had plenty of guys that are banged up. They're dealing with stuff. Mark Stone had a second back surgery in 9 months in January and came back for the playoffs, but they've had a pretty healthy lineup this entire run. And that's just another one of those reasons why they are where they are right now and why they're continuing to be successful.
If Guttis isn't available, how potentially detrimental would that be?
Yeah, I think that pair really dropped off without him when they inserted Casey Fitzgerald into the lineup, just in case Goose can go in game 2. The Panthers went with 11 forwards and 7 defensemen. And then with Casey Fitzgerald and Josh Mahura on the ice as the Florida's third defensive pair, it just wasn't the same as Guttis and Mahura. I think he does so much for his partner in Mahura in terms of being that physical shutdown defender. So it really did change things, and the Knights really did take advantage of having that pair on the ice when it was out there and when they can kind of hunt it a little bit when they had last change at home. Paul Maurice would be able to shelter those guys a little bit better when the Panthers have home ice advantage. But still, with all the guys that can do damage against the Knights, I think they're going to be licking their chops a little bit if Florida has to roll that pair out again.
Coming into this series, we knew that it was going to be impactful for either franchise because both were looking for their first Stanley Cup. Covering the Knights as closely as you do, watching this expansion franchise have the success that it's had in just a couple of short years, really, compared to some of these other teams that we see in the league. Can you take us inside and help us sort of understand the meaning of this for the franchise, the relationship that the Knights have with the community of Las Vegas? I mean, you don't necessarily think of Vegas, I don't think, as a sports town, but it is. And they've adopted this team as their own into the fold so quickly. To be able to punctuate that with a Stanley Cup in Vegas, what would that mean to the team, the franchise, and the people who live there?
Yeah, I think it would obviously be massive. This is something that this team has chased since the beginning. Owner Bill Foley, before the team even started playing, said we want playoffs in 3, cup in 6. And they really beat projections on the first one. And now we're in season 6, and they're 2 wins away from that first Stanley Cup and making their owner look very, very smart. And look, the Knights have been chasing this really, really aggressively. They haven't been kind of tiptoeing their way into the NHL. They've made a lot of bold swings to try to get to where they want to be. And that includes, jettisoning some fan favorites like Marc-Andre Fleury being the biggest example. They've taken pieces off the first team out in recent years like Nate Schmidt, Ryan Reeves, but it was all in service of kind of getting to this ultimate goal. And I think if they are able to do that, I mean, obviously the fan base would just be ecstatic. There's been a lot of fans that have followed this team from day one. I don't think you can mention the connection that's kind of been formed there without talking about, unfortunately, the real tragedy of October 1, 2017 in Las Vegas, the mass shooting on the Strip that really brought the community and the team together because the team was there to help out, to volunteer, to talk to people at blood drives, to visit first responders, all that stuff that, the Knights or the Las Vegas previously didn't have a major league professional sports team to do. So it kind of gave the city something to rally around in a really dark moment. And the magical run they went on to the Stanley Cup final that year, I think gave a lot of people hope. And so there's a lot of people that have been clinging on to them ever since, that have been looking up to this team ever since. And so I think to see this team now go all the way would obviously just be a tremendous boost for a lot of people in the city.
Yeah, it's a great point that you bring up, and you can't underscore the impact that tragedy had enough. A couple of different insiders we've been speaking with have noted that exact thing, that there is a bond that exists between the community and this team that was unfortunately formed in the wake of something really terrible, but that they care about this team, that this community has embraced this team. From what you know about the way that the Knights are built, the depth that you've detailed, the goaltending right now that has been incredible, is there any reason to think that just because they hit the road, they won't be able to continue to have the success that they've had and maybe even wrap this thing up, sooner rather than later?
Yeah, we'll obviously have to see. Florida's going to have a say in that. But like I mentioned, I mean, the Knights are rolling right now. They've been a machine, in the playoffs. They've been a machine on the road all year. And they, I think, have the experience in their locker room to weather the kind of rocky moments that sometimes hit you within games and within series. Obviously, you never know, never say never. There have been 5 teams in the Stanley Cup final that have rallied back from a 2-0 deficit in order to win the Stanley Cup. But this Knights team has kind of felt different all year. It's definitely felt different in the playoffs. And so far in the final, it, of course, feels different as well on a different level than Florida. We'll see whether the Panthers are able to raise their level of play to match it. But right now, it is pretty easy to see, the Knights taking this one.
Ben Gotz from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Thank you so much for spending the time. It must be a really fun team to cover, so dominant out west all year long, and now on the precipice of winning a Stanley Cup and bringing that back to Vegas. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks so much for having me.